Commission for Tuesday, March 19th. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Ahmed, Commissioner Alpert,
Here.
Commissioner Curtis,
Present.
Vice Chair Kuznick, and Chair Wallace.
I'm here. Mr. Barr, why don't you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public comment. This portion of public comment is devoted to matters that are not on our calendar for tonight. If you want to talk about the A's or the 49ers, that works, but nothing that's on the calendar later on. So first of all, let me open public comment. First, do we have any written communications?
Written public comment was received from Brittany Dixon and Cameron Klotz, and a copy of their comments were provided to the commission prior to the meeting.
Okay. Do we have any cards of people who would like to address us close and personal?
No speaker cards.
Okay. So, not seeing anybody running down to the podium anxious to speak, going once, going twice. Public comments is now closed. We have no additions or revisions, which is item 5. Item 6, the consent calendar, our favorite part of the calendar. We have 2 items on the consent calendar. The first is the Transportation Advisory Committee appointments and the recommendations therefore by our ad hoc committee. And the second is our 2023 General Plan Annual Report and Climate Action Plan Biannual Report. That's like every other year, I think. So the consent calendar is done without comment. If someone wants to make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll go ahead and make a movement to approve the consent calendar for the meeting of March 9th, 2024. Excuse me. I'll second.
Okay, let's open it up for a roll call vote. Or a vote.
Yeah.
Okay, the consent calendar is approved by a vote of 4 yes, no 0, no abstains, and 1 no vote because Commissioner Kuznick is in another state. I meant a sister state, not something else. Okay. Item number 7.1, minutes from the February 2024 meeting. Do we have any changes, corrections, or additions? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll go ahead and second it.
Okay, the minutes from the February 2024 meeting of the Planning Commission have been approved by a vote of 4-0 with 1 no vote. Item number 8, continued items after closing a public comment, we have none. Item number 9, continued items, open public hearing, we have none. Item number 10, public hearing, new items, we have none. Item number 11, non-public hearing action items, we have none. Item 12, study session, commissioner liaison reports, and items of interest. Item 12.1 is a overview of the 2024 California housing legislation. Ms. Yu, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good evening. Let me just pull up the presentation here. You should have a copy of the PowerPoint in front of you. I'll go ahead and just provide an overview of just the highlights of this last year's legislative changes to housing law. So some of you may remember back in 2017, we made a big to-do about how there were so many housing laws being approved and to try to boost new housing construction. 15 landmark bills at the time. In 2023, there were over 100 such bills introduced to the legislature, and 56 housing bills were ultimately signed by the governor this past year to increase housing affordability. And so again, as with past years in 2024, these housing bills are meant to address the housing shortage by facilitating more affordable housing production and enhancing enforcement of state housing laws. So tonight is just to provide you a brief overview of the key legislative changes that are going into effect this year, as well as highlighting some changes that are happening in the following year. And I've broken them down into different subjects. And so the first heading and the first four bills to cover is related to project processing. Go ahead and start with SB 423. This is the modification to streamlined approval. So this is actually an extension of what's commonly referred to as SB 35, which was originally approved in 2017 and was set to sunset in 2026. And it requires cities to approve certain housing projects that meet minimum affordable housing requirements if the city has not met its state mandated housing targets. And so this first one requires that where rental projects set aside 10% of units as affordable, these units must be made affordable to very low income households, not simply to low income households as previously provided. Now, San Ramon has met our above moderate production. And so under SB 35, there are different levels of restrictions. Some cities that have met all of their housing production, about 40 or so jurisdictions in the state of California, and then another 246 that have not met their above moderate, but have met their certain production of housing units. And so San Ramon falls into the category of having met our above moderate income production in our last housing element cycle, but did not meet enough of our lower income housing. So for this particular section about the 10% for rental projects wouldn't actually apply in San Ramon, but again, this bill doesn't sunset until 2036 now. And so potentially as we get further into our housing cycle, depending on how many above moderate units we do approve, there is always a possibility that SB 423 could apply to us. But we have certainly have adopted housing element as well as provide annual reports to the state. And so this bill really is all about production of housing. And so if your city hasn't been producing enough units in various types of income categories, then you can expect some more streamlined by right approval coming your way.
Before we move on, let's go back to 423. Could you define for us what type of housing project would qualify in San Ramon for the streamlined approach?
Under SB 423?
Yes.
So I don't know all of the intricate details exactly of 423. The ones that were highlighted in the overview from attorneys that provided it was that there are coastal zones, for example. San Ramon does not qualify for that. There are high fire hazard areas that previously were exempt and now are part of SB 423, you're no longer exempt just because there's fire danger potentially in your community. And then there's also if you haven't provided enough production. We haven't studied how exactly all of this bill could potentially affect us. But we do know that because we've adopted our certified housing element and we have our APRs, and we've met our production of above moderate income units, at least the 10% provisions do not apply to the city. There are certain projects that have other sections of the government code that have by right approvals, but as it's related to SB 423, it's very limited in the way that it applies to the city. There are certain circumstances still under SB 35 that say, if a project is providing 50% of lower income units, and they're using skilled labor, et cetera, then those projects could apply. SB 423 is just a revamp of SB 35. So anything that had been required under SB 35 still continues to carry forward through SB 423. So it's just to say that there are very nuanced requirements of SB 423 and depending on exactly what type of project is being proposed, it may or may not be subject to SB 423 in Saramone.
No, I understand. I mean, the printout I have for 423 is 18 pages long. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a sort of a common denominator for low income housing that would be a trigger for applying this rule? For example, if Bob comes in and has a project and 15% of the units will be set aside for either very low or low income, would that qualify for SB 423 treatment?
Our first read of it is it doesn't just with the 15%. They'd have to be at least well over 50%. And then also some other, components of their project would have to be met before they could qualify for streamlined review. But every time I try to memorize something next year, it changes. And so when we get a project, we'll review it against, these provisions. And if it does apply, then we'll be able to make that determination.
Okay. I was trying to get a forward look, but thank you. I interrupted enough.
Okay, next one related to project processing is SB 684. This is the streamlined ministerial approval for small homeownership projects. So this is really a long way of saying certain subdivisions that are less than 10 units or fewer can be approved ministerially. So without any discretion or review hearings, but there are some very particular requirements for the streamlined review. It does have to, these decisions have to be done within 60 days. And they have to be on legal parcels that are no larger than 5 acres, but it also exempts projects that are in flood zones, earthquakes zones, wetlands, high fire severity zones. So there's a number of different requirements to qualify for streamlining, but so there's a long list of things that would prevent a project from meeting these requirements. But it's just another way of increasing production of housing. Again, if you have a 5-acre lot and it's relatively, urbanized area with all of the, maybe it's previously vacant from something exiting out of it previously, and they want to subdivide it into 9 units, potentially that can be done as a administratively approved subdivision now. So that will be, and that doesn't go into effect until later this year, but something that cities are kind of ramping up to make sure that we're.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
The term ministerially approved, is that synonymous with a by right project, or are there differences between those two terms?
So it's basically no discretion. So you meet certain objective standards like the 5 acre minimum, no more than 5 acres. You're not on a wetlands, you're not an earthquake zone. And so as long as you meet all of those objective discretion, there's no discretion on the review of that project.
When we say the term, it's a by right project, that means that it is ministerially approved of
Correct.
it. Okay, so it's
Right.
not like they're two sides of the same.
Yep, same,
Got it.
same,
Okay.
same, we use that synonymously.
So since Commissioner Alpo brought up that question, I have one. How are conditions of approval for a project treated? Because then I ask, because as you know, we've had projects where we've had 180 conditions of approval, many of which only applied to that particular project. So I'm wondering how you would ministerially draft conditions of approval when not all projects are the same.
So you can have conditions of approval on a subdivision application that would just be ministerially approved. Or like building permits is another classic example of ministerially approved projects that will still be subject to hours of construction or following nesting bird requirements, things like that that are allowed in our municipal code as conditions of the permit being issued. Same thing, calling them conditions of approval, but it will not be conditions that are typically associated with a development plan application, which oftentimes speak to findings of public health or safety and those types of things that may require us, the city planning commissioner council to require conditions that would be, above and beyond what the municipal code would allow.
Well, just coming off the top of my head, what about a project where it's built right next to, say, a very traffic street, and there's some people who think that there ought to be a sound wall to protect the new people in those new developments? Would that be something that could be a condition of approval under ministerial approval?
Well, we would just have to see with that project exactly how it would meet the ministerial requirements. There are certain things that, like CEQA, there are exemptions until it triggers a requirement. So on projects that are say that they're ministerially approved, there's oftentimes exceptions to that requirement. So you can build your project if you're under 5 acres, but if the city discovers that there's a flood zone, during the site development process, then you're no longer, that project may not be allowed to move forward. So just again, depends on the project and the circumstances, and at the time that it comes in and applies. Requesting the ministerial approval, we'll have to review the project when it comes in to make sure that it meets all of the requirements and conditions that may be applied to it.
Well, if you're deciding what conditions of approval to apply to project A, doesn't that imply sort of a level of discretion as opposed to ministerial?
Every project that comes in has to be reviewed to determine whether it can qualify for the ministerial review. So anytime we get an application, there's no way automatically to determine that. So we do have to use a checklist when we are reviewing those things as planners to make sure that if it's using SB 684 versus SB 432, and which portion of the government code can apply to that project. But it's not always as black and white, unfortunately, for us to say this project will qualify for ministerial and automatically be exempt from certain things. A project may be ministerially process, but still may be potentially subject to other standards that would be required of it as conditions of approval.
Well, okay, well, I think we sort of belabored the point, but by the point, we'll probably get to that somewhere down the line. I don't mean tonight, but when we have a real live project, it's, there's always been a difference in between approving a project and approving the project subject to conditions of approval. You have to approve the project. We're going to build a 50-story apartment complex, but there are certain conditions that are attached to it in order to make it go. And that's the issue, is which ones you apply to that particular project, which by definition is a discretionary act. But rather than keep you up here, we're having a philosophical debate on it. We'll probably reach that bridge when we come to it on a real project.
All right, so I think this is the last one related to project processing, AB 821. This is related to general plan and zoning consistencies. And this is just an acknowledgement really by the legislature that there are going to be inconsistencies between the zoning ordinance and general plan. And this spells out specifically what happens when a zoning ordinance is not consistent with the general plan, what cities then should be doing if there's an inconsistency. So it lays out a process with it that the city would need to follow if there is a conflict between those two. But you know, we're hopefully with our update that we just did and with our future zoning ordinance, we'll continue to make sure that we're trying to address the inconsistency issue.
Didn't we have sort of the same problem with the Iron Horse Village, because there was a specific plan definition and a general plan? And as I recall, the applicant opted for the general plan requirements.
Yeah, so things like repealing the North Ramon plan, going back to conventional zoning, and having those two documents rather than having layer on top of layer of zoning and general plan standards. We're hopefully making it easier for cities to apply the right development standards and developers to follow the development standards that we've laid out for those sites. Looks like we have one more related to project processing here. This is AB 1218. This is replacement housing requirements. And this just expands SB 330 replacement housing requirements to all development projects where protected units have been demolished in the last 5 years. It doesn't happen that often in Saramone, but this can affect a number of older cities where there's redevelopment on the site and they're looking at building new units on top of that. You do have to evaluate what units were previously on site and determine what those impacts might be to the existing tenants or tenants that previously lived there. But it does require the replacement of that housing either concurrent or prior to that development project moving forward. But it does give alternatives to on-site construction. And then these next two are related to affordable housing entitlements. SB 4 is the affordable housing on faith and higher education land. This, in summary, just requires that cities issue ministerially, so again, by right approval that would make them exempt from CEQA for certain affordable housing projects that are located on lands that are owned by independent institutions of higher education or religious institutions. And so there are some definitions of what qualifies as religious institution or higher education. There's nonprofit status or other registrations that somebody has to identify that they qualify for those. But if they owned that land prior to January 1st of this year, it gives them the ability to present a 100% affordable housing project as a by right approval. And so local jurisdictions would not have the ability to prohibit that type of development. There are still again, development standards that they have to follow. So height, parking, setbacks, that type of restriction that will still apply to those projects. But it's just, again, another way to speed up housing production in the cities. And this bill would sunset in 2036. There's probably a number of properties in Saramone that either are owned by religious institutions or institutions of higher education, like the community college property, but nothing that we're aware of yet on whether or not they will pursue that. But this does give that opportunity for some of those sites that may be looking for housing for either their teachers or employees of that higher education, or maybe employees of those religious institutions to give them just another opportunity to develop on their property. It does also allow for certain ancillary uses on the ground floor as well, such as daycares and things that may support those uses. Library or bookstore, things like that. But ultimately, again, just building in flexibility.
Question, under SB4, does the religious or educational institution have to maintain an ownership interest in the property in order for this to apply? In other words, a school can't just sell its entire property to Joe Developer and use SB4, can they?
I'm not certain about that particular part. I don't know if the law, it probably does give some information as to either who can own that property, or if they were to sell it off, what that obligation is. Typically with these, with 100% affordability, it's you tend to have a much higher density because there's at least a minimum of 20 dwelling units per acre. So these tend to be generally multifamily rental types of projects. But I don't know that answer off the top of my head on
Okay,
the ownership.
that's fine. The reason I asked is because I remember when this was being discussed, the idea was to develop unused parking lots of churches that weren't using them. And that was sort of the idea. It wasn't to sell a cathedral, rip it down and put up low-cost housing, but I guess we'll wait and see what happens.
Okay, AB 1490, this is the extremely affordable adaptive reuse projects. So this allows the conversion of motels, hotels, transient lodging, et cetera, to extremely low income housing. So they do have to meet certain criteria. It's 100% of the units have to be lower income, and then at least 50% of those units have to be very low income. You have to you're subject to a deed restriction. You can't be next to industrial uses. If you have less than 50 units more than 50 units on site, you have to have on-site management services. So there's a number of different things that would be the project would be obligated to if they were trying to do extremely low income or very low income units. But it does give an opportunity just to take a piece of property that may already have lodging there to convert. And a number of we're seeing, at least in other jurisdictions, a lot of property owners who are taking advantage of state funding that's been made available to purchase hotels and then do conversion for extremely low income housing or for housing for the unhoused. And so there's a number of different cities that are using this. There's not too many motels or hotels, at least in Saramone, that may potentially meet this criteria.
So a question on this one, when it says allows, does that imply that it's not allowed today, or is it one of those ministerially approved projects?
You're right. So ministerially approved.
Okay. So if it meets the criteria, it could fall into that ministerial bucket. Got it.
Right. Okay, so these next couple of ones are related to the California Environmental Quality Act. The first one is AB 1449. This is the affordable housing exemption, and there are a number of affordable housing exemptions that are already built into CEQA. This one spells out very specifically, though, that qualifying projects have to meet certain criteria, and it's prevailing wages, and you have to be within an urban area. You're subject to tax credit regulations, and you have to have utilities, and so you're essentially in a fairly urbanized area, but it's just another tool that developers have to qualify for a CEQA exemption. AB 1633, this compels local agencies to take action under CEQA. So this amended the Housing Accountability Act to enable housing project applicants under certain circumstances to compel local agency to issue a CEQA exemption or to adopt a negative declaration or amendment or certify a environmental impact report. So in order for a city to be compelled to take action on the CEQA determination, the project does have to have a minimum project density of at least 15 dwelling units per acre. Applicants must give the local agency written notice that they feel that they qualify for the exemption or for approval of their certification of their document. So it spells out that it's essentially a violation for a city to refuse to make a CEQA exemption determination when you're dealing with a project that qualifies under AB 1633. So if a city says, I don't think you qualify for that exemption, then it's an applicant can call the city out and say, we believe that we do, and this is our reasons why. And so if we refuse to make that exemption determination based on information that they've provided, then it could be a violation of the HAA. Similarly, if we hold a meeting for an EIR or other similar CEQA document, but we decline to approve the document based on CEQA findings, but there's substantial evidence that supports that the EIR should be certified, and that project is, again, protected by AB 1633, it would also be a violation to not approve the CEQA CEQA document. It's another way to prevent a city from denying a project through CEQA rather than denying the project based on the face of the project.
Well, I think this really arose because there were some cities that basically they had a CEQA document pending, and they kept kicking the can down the road. They wouldn't make a decision. I think that happened at least in San Francisco, and that's one of the reasons I think they put this in there to make a Fisher cut bait decision on EIR.
Yeah, that was one of the example cities that were brought up when they were highlighting this particular bill. SB 69, this is CEQA notices on determination. This just requires that cities now are filing our notices of determination exemptions with the state clearinghouse. So not just notice of determinations, but also exemptions. You would drive down to the clerk's office and Martinez and put the posting up, but now you also have to file it with the state clearinghouse and have them posted on their website. And then these next couple of bills are related to density bonus and inclusionary housing. AB 1287, this is additional density bonuses. And so this enables certain projects to receive an additional density bonus beyond what density bonus law previously authorized. So for mixed income projects, they would first have to qualify for the maximum basic density bonus of 50%. So if you provided 24% low income units or 15% very low income units or 44% if your project was dedicated to moderate, and you unit, already the maximum basic density bonus, projects could potentially be eligible for a density bonus of up to an additional 50%. So in total, 100% density bonus if more units are set aside for very low income or moderate income households. So just another incentive to construct more of the affordable housing units in California, and just encouraging if you can qualify for at least the maximum density bonus, the state will now give you the option, if you provide more, to have even a greater percentage of units on your property.
Have you seen developers use this provision to increase the density of some of their projects? So I ask because there's been articles, for example, in the San Jose Mercury, that a number of housing projects that had been planned down in that area, the developers sort of pulled it, and instead of increasing density, they did just the opposite, because they said the cost of building it with the interest rates was made a very dense project infeasible. I'm wondering if you've seen projects, at least in the general Bay Area, where SB or AB 1287 has been used to maximize density.
Well, at least in Ceremony, we haven't, and it's not uncommon that developers will use, whatever tools are available to them at that particular present point in time to maybe to best benefit their project. So it used to be when interest rates were low and construction costs were low, or supplies and other construction materials were low. It was potentially a developer would be wanting to maximize the number of units that could be constructed on site so that they could resell those units or charge a lot of rent for those units, because there's a lot of demand for that. With interest rates creeping up and other costs associated with construction going up, developers are now looking at, what type of housing units are going to best, serve me or my return on investment today. So there are going to be developers that may find that getting more units will make sense for that particular project, and then right next door may decide, I've paid a little too much for this project. I need maybe different types of housing units here that will, provide a better return. So every site is unique unto itself. Different restrictions, different prices that they've paid, how long they've owned it, what their interest rates are for carrying that loan. There's so many different factors. And that's just one where today it may not be feasible for a project to maximize using AB 1287, but maybe when interest rates come down, the reverse may happen and somebody may rely on this to get more units. So AB 713, this is just revised definitions of maximum density and development standards that are already in the government code. It used to be that the definition in the government code would say development standards are regulations that include heights, setbacks, lot coverage, and they had a whole list of what a development standard was. Now it just modifies the definition that says, if you've locally adopted a zoning ordinance that spells out what a development standard is, that's your development standard. So as long as you've adopted something either through local initiative, referendum, or zoning ordinance has been adopted, that's now a development standard. And then AB 323, this is additional restrictions when selling affordable units. And so this is just if a developer is required to sell units to income eligible purchasers. It just spells out specifically that if you are subject to selling those units, that those units have to be sold to income eligible purchasers. And then, if that unit may not, for whatever reason doesn't sell in this market, then the developer can sell that unit to a qualified nonprofit housing corporation, to ensure that the occupancy of that unit is going to be, income eligible. So, this would, be like, a developer may have said, I'm going to donate this unit instead of, actually selling that unit to a buyer. Donation to a nonprofit may have previously met the requirements of your affordable housing, but it's now saying developers specifically have to sell those units to an income qualified person, and then gives the option, if the unit doesn't sell, then you can turn it over to specifically a nonprofit housing corporation, just can't be any nonprofit. So now we're moving into accessory dwelling units, AB 976. So first one, it no longer requires owner occupancy of ADUs. There are some cities that specifically require that ADUs have to be owner occupied. That was set to expire in 2025. AB 976 extends the prohibition indefinitely, so cities can no longer require that the ADU or the primary unit has to be owner occupied. And then AB 1033, this is the option to permit separate conveyance of ADUs. So this just gives local agencies the option to allow for subdivision of a property that has an ADU that can be then separately conveyed from the primary dwelling unit. So essentially subdividing the property and then selling that ADU unit off to another owner. So the bill gives the cities the option to do that. We don't currently, at least in Saramone, have in our work plan to implement an ordinance or adopt an ordinance. So at least presently, the bill gives us the option to adopt an ordinance, and we're choosing, at least at this time, not to pursue adopting one. Okay, AB 1332. This is pre-approval program. So this one is a little vague in the language of the bill, but our first read of this bill essentially requires that cities have to adopt a pre-approval program by January 1st, 2025. So it gives us some time to figure out exactly what a pre-approved program means to Saramone. At least with the research that I've done, it says that local agencies must develop a program where we can accept ADU submissions for pre-approval. And then once that ADU plan is approved, we're required to approve or deny that application within 30 days. The city of Saramone has already developed plans that are going through a pre-approval process. We're expecting that this year we'll actually have, before that January 1st deadline, we will have a program that's in place by the time January 1st comes around. But we can actually utilize the pre-approved plans that the city is developing to qualify as our program. We just have to spell out specifically, if somebody wanted to use those plans, how would they then utilize those plans? And then if they wanted to use other pre-approved plans, can they use those plans? And then what sort of process does it go through for us to locally allow somebody to use somebody else's pre-approval?
So question on the pre-approved plan, are you talking about a construction document that basically says we will allow you to build an ADU if it looks like this?
So pre-approved plan isn't actually defined in the government code. So, you know, one city may feel that pre-approved plans are just floor plans and architectural designs. Other cities may feel like a pre-approved plan is architectural designs, structural drawings, soils report, building permit, ready to be, you know, that have already been previously reviewed, that can simply move straight into issuance of that permit for construction as long as you meet setbacks and, you know, site-specific requirements. So it's not really defined what pre-approved is. Our pre-approved program that the city has developed plans for is in the process of finalizing. Those plans are, would allow for somebody to take those drawings, plus all of the review that's been done by our building official and say, I'd like to construct these. My site meets all of the minimum setbacks and placement requirements. And the city with those plans could issue the building permit because we've already previously reviewed building permits and construction documents for that. So our program is designed, or I should say our pre-approved plans program is designed to allow somebody to pick that set of plans, hand it to their contractor, and that contractor would be able to build those units. But not all pre-approved plans are designed the same way as San Ramon's. And because the state law is a bit vague as to what exactly qualifies as a pre-approved plan, some cities may simply feel like architectural plans, floor plans, something to that effect would qualify for pre-approved. So it's up to a city to determine what that pre-approved plan program will look like. We envision, at least in San Ramon, that if somebody wanted to use the city of San Ramon's pre-approved plans, that they could take those and be able to move right into construction. Okay. Parking. So 2 bills related to parking, AB 894, this is shared parking. Generally, property owners can enter into a shared parking agreement with others, and shared parking counts towards a development's required parking. So San Ramon already has a version of shared parking standards in our zoning ordinance. Some cities do not have the allowance for shared parking, but this bill specifically requires that cities must allow for a property owner to come up with a plan to meet its parking requirements. But you do have to be contiguous or within walking distance to be able to share that parking. There's requirements for how it's if your parking's already over capacity, probably isn't a good site to share that parking with. But if 20% of that development's parking is not currently occupied, you could utilize a shared parking agreement to then be able to meet your requirements. There are noticing requirements and meeting requirements before a city can approve the shared parking. But if the developer provides a parking analysis that shows that demonstrates that they can meet the parking standards for their project, then cities have to accept that as valid analysis to allow for a parking reduction on site. We still have to do periodic reviews and approvals, but it does give us the ability to just allowing a project to be approved without the all of the parking on site.
So the 20% of a development's parking lot is not occupied. Is that related to the satellite parking?
Yes, this is
Okay.
like parking, right?
Okay, and then on the last bullet point, you have Agreement either secures long-term parking provision or allows periodic review and approval. I'm not quite sure what the periodic review and approval relates to. Is that whether the satellite parking is doing its job by allowing all the occupants of the primary development to be parking there?
So, I don't know if they actually define what long-term parking provision is in the government code. I haven't checked that particular part, if it's a 5-year agreement or 10-year agreement, what exactly is long-term. But it gives you the option, if a developer was able to secure a long-term parking agreement, then that can be used to satisfy the requirement. If they don't have what's considered a long-term agreement, then you can maybe do an annual review or, continue to monitor to make sure that the parking, there's no parking issues on either site.
Okay, that's what I was sort of getting at is option number 2, which is, okay, let's suppose Bob builds his 40-unit apartment building and part of the parking is done on Sally's parking lot 1,500 feet away. If it turns out that Sally's parking lot isn't able to hold all the overflow from Bob's apartment building, then what happens? Bob's already built the apartment building. There's people living there.
Yeah.
He can't really just kick them out, can he?
Well, it would have to be spelled out in the shared parking agreement, what happens if somebody doesn't perform or is not, meeting their requirements. And so, it's a bill that the state thought would help with housing production. So as far as whether they've thought through, all the if, ands, or buts, I'm not sure, but it just gives another option for somebody to meet its shared parking or its parking obligations without having it completely all on site.
It's one of those, let's see if it works or not.
Well, the way that state law already reads, there's already a reduction in parking. You already have density bonus options, but if by chance you don't qualify for a density bonus and you already are not meeting the minimum parking requirements that state law, the maximum parking requirements that state law allows a city to require, then you always have AB 894 in your back pocket.
Okay, thank you.
It can be, so, and probably some of those parking analysis that might share maybe the adjacent office complexes, parking structure, that could potentially be an opportunity for commercial property to share residential. AB 1308, this is parking for single-family homes. And this is really specific. It's related to a owner of a single-family home that's seeking to remodel, renovate, or add to their existing single-family home. But that single-family home will not, as long as that unit does not already exceed like lot coverage, height, other development standards that are imposed by the city, then cities cannot increase the minimum parking requirements as a condition of approval. So just because we think that the unit now by adding 2 additional bedrooms is going to trigger a need for more parking spaces on site, we're no longer allowed to require more parking than what the minimum parking requirements are. These are just related to housing development financing. I don't have any slides that spell these out, but these are just very specific changes that were made to continue to help development, housing development financing. There's some additional reportings that the city has to do for mitigation fees to actually identify how the fees are being used. And then SB 747, maybe 480, these are related to surplus lands. City doesn't really have very many surplus lands, but it does require certain noticing and affordability requirements if you are proposing development on surplus lands. And that's it.
Quick, oh, sorry.
Good.
Just quick question. So obviously a lot of new information here, so thank you for bringing that to us. which of these do you find would be the most important for us to really understand in depth in terms of projects in the pipeline or things that we're currently looking at? I mean, some of those obviously have more impact than others.
Yeah.
So if we really should try to understand how that would impact future of San Ramon in terms of building out housing and or commercial, what would you suggest are going to be the ones that have the most impact to us?
I would probably say the bills that, so this is a difficult question to answer because every year we get a set of bills and then certain planners or the HCD may highlight, like, you have to really be careful about these. We saw that with like a previous bill, SB 9, that said cities will now be able to take their single family lots and then subdivide those and create a lot of multiple lots on the property. San Ramon hasn't had, we've had one application for an SB 9. So it just depends. I think that a lot of these bills have when you read the headline, it sounds like it has a major impact, but then you read at like the requirements of that bill. So you have to be 100% affordable. Then you have to have at least 50% very low, or you can subdivide your property that's less than 5 acres, which there's a lot of properties in San Ramon that have less than 5 acres and can be subdivided for 10 units or less. But you can't be in an earthquake fault zone. You can't be in wetlands. You can't be habitat protection or conservation easement. A lot of San Ramon is pretty much already built out. Whoever owns that property probably already took advantage of maximizing to the extent possible. So there's very few opportunities for something like that could potentially impact San Ramon, as opposed to other cities where their minimum lot sizes are 5 acres. And so in unincorporated areas where you see much larger parcels, I could see that being a huge impact on unincorporated, Contra Costa County or Alameda County. So it's hard to highlight some specific ones. I think the ones that probably do not require prevailing wage may be ones that impact San Ramon a little bit more than others. The ones that then allow for projects to be built by right could have an impact, but again, you have to meet very specific criteria for that to happen. So I don't see a whole lot of these having a major impact, but then again, you just never know. Somebody may find, that bill's loophole to be able to qualify. I will say, it's something like SB 423, where if we are not producing a lot of housing as we get closer to the middle of our cycle, then we may be concerned about that at that time. But a lot of these were already kind of ahead of the curve. So pre-approved ADUs, we already have something that we feel that's going to meet that requirement. A number of zoning ordinance changes or that are already in our housing program. So I don't see that not very many of these have taken us by surprise, but the subdivision of 10 units or fewer, I think there is a potential to generate some applications that we never had considered before. But there's not too many of those properties in San Ramon that haven't already taken advantage of their full development potential.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Shaking heads side to side. Thank you, Ms. Shea.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. What's next on the calendar are commissioner liaison reports. Do we have any?
So I attended the Parks Commission last week. They had the city manager's finance report that we got previously. They also did some appointments to the advisory committees that they oversee. And then they had the library advisory committee annual report. And then lastly, Sunrise Park, that's the park up at the preserves, is getting close to coming online. I don't know the exact date, but the discussion was from a condition of approval that was made years and years ago, that there would be a public hearing on the lighting. And so they've been testing the lighting up there in the park for a while, running it, and the Parks Commission did a visit a previous week, and they reaffirmed the condition of approval. The lights will go on at dusk and go off at 10 p.m. There was a few people that spoke from the sports organizations, very appreciative of the lighting and the turf field that they're going to have up there. And there was one speaker that was a little concerned that the lights might be bright, at night. And the park staff, just was very confident in the vendor they selected as being the preeminent vendor for this kind of lighting. And that while it's being tuned and tested, there might be some light spillover, but they were assured that it would work really well by the time the city accepts the project and they move forward. And that was the Parks Commission.
So yesterday, I attended the Open Space Advisory Committee meeting, which has now been moved to 4:00 on the instead of 8:30 in the morning. So pretty much everybody was awake. We actually had a park commissioner at our meeting, who's a standing member, and she did talk about the lights, which at least some of us will recall when we were looking at the park for Faria. It was the lights that were the thing that caused the most discussion. And what we were told at Open Space was that the lights they plan to install there are LEDs that face downward, state of the art, and that most of the people were at the meeting that you went to were not really that concerned about the light spillage. So with respect to Open Space Committee itself, what they basically decided on was there'll be 2 hikes in the spring, 2 hikes in the fall. There will be a booth at the Art and Wood Festival that Open Space will man to explain the concept of open space to the people there, and that they're looking for a non-hiking event probably around January or February. They've had 1 or 2 already. They had a exhibition by a photographer, and they had another program by a hiking person that were very well attended. So they're looking at trying to do something along those lines towards the beginning of next year. That's my report. So Mr. Ballard, the floor is yours to tell us what we're going to be doing in the next meeting or two.
Okay, so in April, first meeting, April 2nd, we're going to be coming back with objective design standards for you. We'll also be providing some information on use by right. We are looking at, for April 16th, a use permit for medical office use at Bishop Branch 15. And then we're also going to come with a retail analysis to have a discussion about non-retail percentages in shopping centers and the like. Also, I'm working with the developers of Avalon Bay to set up a meeting date for their project to come before the Planning Commission. They did go to architectural review last week.
Right, yeah. Okay, anybody have any other comments or questions? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.